So hello and welcome back to the next video in our series on making tests with our DevOps and testing projects that we've been working with. In this video, we're going to continue with what we built in our .NET project previously, where we created a console application, connected that to our GitHub repo, and saw how GitHub Actions works in real time. So to continue this lesson, we're going to look at how to add a unit test into this project and then make sure that it's running and seeing that in our GitHub Actions. I recommend that you start with the project that we already set up and connected to our GitHub repo. If you don't have that, you could walk back through the steps of that previous video where we created the repo, connected the project, and set up our actions so that we could see when those were running correctly. So to get started, I'm going to create, just right here in my program CS file, I'm going to create a new class. I'm just going to call it calculator. And I probably should have turned my Copilot off because you can see it's trying to inject a bunch of things that we don't need to be that sophisticated. Really what I want to do is just create in here an add method that's going to take, okay, I'll take this first part. Let's get rid of this extra stuff. We'll just take the add. Takes an A and a B as integer and just adds those two together and returns it, right? So pretty simple little calculator class. So we're going to need a unit test project. And if you've not set one of these up before, especially for .NET, there's a couple of different packages and frameworks you can use for writing unit tests. I'm going to use the one that's built into like .NET specifically, which is called MS Test. And so we'll need to create a new project. So under your solution, you can add a new project, and we can find under the MS Test module an MS Test project. And that will add that to our solution. You can name it the project what you like. This is going to be my calculator tests. And that will add that into our solution and drop us right into our first unit test. So we can see we use these decorators that are already given to us to define that this is a test class, and then methods inside of here are defined as test methods. And these decorators allow the compiler to understand that these are tests, and so in our test runner, we're able to see those show up. And if you're not familiar with this or you're not sure where to find it, the test menu at the top in Visual Studio, you can go to your Test Explorer. And here we can see there's our calculator tests because that's the defined item that we have. And then inside of here, we can drill into, this is called test 1 right now. We're going to rename it. And this test method, and we can see that these are defined and we know that they exist. So if you want to hold on to this, this menu, we'll look at it again in a second, but let's work on our unit test and get it ready. So I'm going to name this calculator tests so that it has a better name. And then our first test method, I'm going to call this add returns correct sum, right? And so you always want to name your test methods something that is relevant to the actual action that you are testing or the expected results of the test to make it easier to manage your tests. Because remember what we learned about unit tests is that we are testing a lot of individual pieces of functionality or data returns, making sure a method performs as it should. And you end up with a lot of unit tests. So you want to name them something appropriate and descriptive so that it doesn't become a mess in your Test Explorer and it makes it difficult to find the test that you need when you're looking for it. So the next thing we need to do before we can really set up our test method and make sure this all works is we have to connect these two projects together, because even though they're under the same solution, they can't really see each other or interact, and we need our test class and the test method we're going to write to be able to see the calculator class that I created at the beginning of the video. So in order to connect the two, we come over to our Solution Explorer, find this part that says Dependencies under Calculator Tests. If you don't have this expanded, that's where you'll find it. And when we right-click on Dependencies, we can add a project reference. And so make sure this checkbox is checked and click OK. And then we should be able to add a using statement at the top of our test class that is the name of the project over here, this namespace, for the class calculator. So adding those two things in means that now if I come over here to my method that we're going to write, I should be able to see the calculator class, right? So if I wanted to create a new instance of my calculator object, I can see that IntelliSense picks it up, highlights it in green. We can see that all of those connections are working. So in our test method, all we want to do is, with this instance of calculator, we want to run the add. And you want to run it with some variables where you're going to know the answer. So we know adding 2 and 3 is going to give us 5. And so we can assert that using the R equal, our result will be 5. And so when this is run, if passing these variables doesn't give us the result that we want, this is not going to pass. And so now we can come over to our Test Explorer, we can see the calculator test, the adds return correct sum, and we should be able to run this test just right here in Visual Studio to see, one, is it passing? So this is how, as a developer, I can write my own unit tests, I can test my code, and I can find out, does my method actually work the way that I expect? So if we click the Run button, you can either run, or if you have a lot of tests, you can run all tests. You can right-click on a particular test and run it, but a green check mark means the test actually passes and we have no issues. Now, if you want to see this in action, we could actually modify our statement to say 2 and 2 should give us 5, and we can check what does that look like when the test doesn't pass. And we can see in here, and we can look at a stack trace if we wanted to try to help us identify maybe what's going on. But we can see here the assert R equal has failed, expected 5, actual 4. So we can see maybe where the problem lies in our code when our unit tests fail to run. And when our tests pass, we get the nice green check mark. So we know locally our tests are passing. And so the next thing we want to do is pass this up to our GitHub Actions pipeline that we've created. And then we can see our tests are passing when we actually check our code in. So this is the place where in our pipeline, we could have lots of different unit tests that are available inside of the project, and the developer doesn't necessarily have to run them locally. When the code is checked into GitHub, our actions will run, and we would be able to see, do those tests pass? So we have our .NET YAML file that we wrote last time, and we had already included at the bottom, even though we didn't have tests to run yet, to include our run test and the run test command for .NET test, which goes and gets the MS test unit tests and runs those. And so at this point, we should be able to check this in and see how things are going. Now, if you don't remember how to check in, since we're connected to GitHub, we should be able to go to our Git Changes window. If you've lost this tab, you can find it under the Git or under the View menus. We have to provide a commit message. So mine's just going to say add unit test. I'm going to commit all, and then we have to push using the up arrow in order for that to get pushed to GitHub, and then we can go look at it on the website. So once you've pushed, you should see that it's running under your actions. You'll have to refresh in order to see it. We can actually click in here and see what's going on. And if it's successful, or I guess even if it's not, come in here and click on build, and you can actually drill into each of the steps that are set up inside of our YAML file and see if there are any steps that did not run correctly. And then we can drill in, like on this run tests one, and actually look at the output and see total test 1, test passed. And if you want to, play with it like we did earlier, where you changed the outcome of this to not be equal, so you can see what that looks like. So you can see what happens if the test fails. So let's see, checking for test failure. Go ahead and commit and push. And then when we go back over to Visual Studio, over to GitHub, and we look at, it's checking for test failure. So we can watch this action run, and what we should get is the red mark, and we can see that there is an error. And then if we drill in, we can see that run test is the one that did not pass, and it just stops. So it doesn't continue to perform the other steps in the YAML file if one of these does not run correctly. So we can come in here and we can see total tests, 1 failed. We get some of that same information that we saw in the Visual Studio window that helps us kind of identify what is going on with our unit test. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about how this works so that you can start setting up unit tests in your own code. And as we kind of continue with our exploration of how to do some of this testing in our project with GitHub Actions, you'll continue to build on this project. So if you are wanting to keep your work kind of in a separate place so that as you build, each step is not overriding the next, you can always branch in GitHub and actually create separate branches for each of these steps, or you can just create separate repos and individual projects for each step. But otherwise, we're just gonna keep building on the same project and sometimes overwrite some things. But that way you get, again, you get your hands dirty with how all of these things work. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll catch you in the next one, and thanks so much.